Hello, let us continue to investigate the Sicilian sidelines when white is playing without knight f3 and d4. And so now we are going to check knight c3 move, so-called closed Sicilian. Pretty often it's white players choose to play like that because his play, especially if he's going as later g3 bishop g2, is pretty simple, and the first and next few moves are logical and obvious. But the minus of it is that actually it's also not too difficult to play with black if you know what you are doing, and I'm going to show you today how to play against knight c3. All in all, there are a couple of lines which might be interesting. You can definitely try with white. But all in all, I think that black has no problems really after knight c3. So now you have to choose, if you are playing black, you must choose the move. Yeah, it pretty much depends on what system you play against the main Sicilian, because white can try to continue with knight f3 and d4. Let's say if you are playing neither, which means you need to play d6 here, because in case of knight c6, white can already play knight f3 simply, yeah, and then transpose to the main Sicilians, and the knight is already on c6, so you cannot get your beloved neither anymore. So that's why I will show you all three moves: e6, knight c6, and d6, depending, let's say, if you're playing Paulsen system, which of course we are going to check later in this course. Then you need to play e6 here, yeah, because otherwise white will play knight f3 and d4. So let's assume that black is playing Paulsen or Taimanov system, so he would probably start with e6, and that is, by the way, perfectly fine, actually, perfectly fine move. But again, if you are not playing with e6, then you shouldn't probably play here e6, because white again can play knight f3 and d4, yeah. So if not knight f3, then, well, there are basically only two logical options. One is to play g3, so trying to play this close Sicilian again, but here black can at first simply transpose to the main lines, playing knight c6, bishop g2, g6, and so on. We will consider it later via the second knight c6 move order. But in fact, d5 is a perfectly good move. There is no problem for black after d5, because ed. Now the problem is that, d4, there is cd4, and white is forced to take with the queen on d4, because the knight is not yet on f3, and that leads to a very playable, very decent position for black. Let's say like this: knight c6, bishop b5, bishop e7, followed by castle, and black is doing perfectly fine here. And in case of bishop g2, knight f6, again the same story. If d4, there is c takes d4, and you must take with the queen, which already then white is losing tempo. Knight c6, and black is doing very well. And black actually wants to play d4 simply, so that's why d3 white usually plays. But here black is perfectly fine, just playing h6. Let's say knight g2, knight c6, developing, and after castles you can already play d4. Here with a complicated, unclear position. Knight e4 takes on e4, bishop takes e4, bishop d6, then castle. Well, it's pretty equal, the position. Black doesn't really have any problem here. And after e6, white can also try to play f4. So already, again, black committed himself to play e6, but it's perfectly fine. You can whether play d5 first, and after knight f3, now you can play knight c6, which we are going to consider now via the third knight c6. But also d4 is playable, knight e4, knight c6, even though here maybe white has certain initiative. Let's say bishop b5, bishop d7. Again, nothing bad for black, definitely. But I think that knight c6 is fine, or d5, knight f3, knight c6. So knight f3, d5. This is a, well, very important actually position. We have many different move orders it can arise on the board. By the way, modern computers pretend that knight h6 is a very strange move, is perfectly fine for black, because then he tries to develop bishop e7, castle, and then play in f5 with black. Well, maybe just pretty unconventional, this way of playing, so I don't know. Somehow my classical chess education is against such moves, but maybe it's actually fine. But d5 is perfectly okay, because now, well, white can of course play d3, but that would lead to just a complicated equal position. So main idea for white is to play bishop b5 here to continue development, and knight g7. And I remember when I was playing f4, second f4 myself, I've told you about it during the first lesson, then this position was considered to be in white's favor. So, but nowadays computers are not so worried here, because black wants to play a6 and just simply to take this bishop. So e takes d5. That was a trick, white's trick, which was supposed to make this line prosperous for white some good 30 years ago. But here, first of all, e d5 is also possible, is not so clear. Queen e2, that was the idea. So somehow white is blocking black's development. For instance, after g6, I remember my trainer at that time, when I was 10 years old or even less than 10, he explained me that then there is queen e5 move, which is strong, and okay, black probably has to play rook g8, even though still maybe it's not totally clear. But queen e2, bishop g4 is playable, and nowadays engines are saying that black is actually quite okay here. But even the simpler is knight takes d5, e d5, knight takes d5, and here it's just an equal position, because normally if white would have its pawn on f2, then he would play knight e5, for instance, like here, knight e5, bishop d7, and take everything on c6, bishop 6, bishop c6, take back on c6, and with a pawn on f2 he would castle and try to make use of black's pawn structure, which is spoiled, I mean, with double pawns on the c line. But with a pawn on f4 is really, pawn is really doing not well on f4, yeah. And now here in this position, let's say castles bishop e7, black is already perfectly fine. I think he would definitely prefer his pawn on f2 in this situation. So actually, there is absolutely no problem to play e6, and maybe again objectively, if you are playing any of the systems with e6, then you should probably just do it here. I suppose the best for white is to play knight f3 followed by d4. I'm not sure white has anything really better than that, because those g3 and f4 lines, which I've just shown you, do not seem to be extremely dangerous for black. But not everybody playing e6, so then knight c6, let's say. Let's say you're playing maybe Sveshnikov variation or Rouser, then you start with knight c6, most probably. And here, well, now white has a choice of different options. Well, knight g2, that was what we studied in the first lesson via the second knight e2 move order. So here knight f6 is fine. Again, if d4, white can transpose to the main Sicilian, but that is not a problem for black if he already played knight c6. And after g3, now, as I've explained already in the previous lesson, black can do different things actually. He can simply play g6, bishop g2, bishop g7 with a normal position. Then e6 is also possible. This position, probably white's best is to move to this Scheveningen, so-called, with bishop on g2, which with if black haven't yet played a6, is pretty harmless, I would say. Let's say bishop e3, bishop d7, and it's perfectly fine for black. So it's another very decent way to play against it. Black can also try to play d5, which also, by the way, probably equalizes. But yeah, I don't know. Here, white maybe has some chances. At least the position becomes pretty complicated. Knight takes d5, for example, bishop g2, knight takes c3, bc3, g6. Again, according to engines, black equalizes like this, but yeah, I would be a little bit worried as black here, because white will have rook b1, castle, knight f4, some initiative somewhere, bishop a3 maybe. Even though probably black is fine, but I would at least pay more attention to this position if I was black in my preparation. But there is knight d4 move, very tricky. Bishop g2, bishop g4. And now let's say if h3 is just nothing, bishop f3, and then takes king f1, knight comes back to d4, and then black is going to take the pawn back on d5 with a good position. So after bishop g4, white can castle, and here it's very, very unclear, complicated position, which requires additional analysis. For example, it's possible to take on d5 because of this pin with the bishop on g4, yeah, pin of the knight on e2. But here f3, bishop f5, d3. This position is very strange. Just to mention that the first line of the engine is h5 here. So very strange, unclear position. I guess playable for both sides. Or after castling, black can play knight f3 check, king h1. Yeah, if king h1, then h5 actually is quite dangerous, because black simply wants to play h4 and actually start to mate white. So after knight f3 check, it's better to take on f3, takes, and d4. It doesn't look good for white. It seems like white is going to get mated soon, yeah, as a queen getting to h3, but it's not so easy. Yeah, in fact, and after c4, supposed to be the best move. Let's say queen e1, knight takes d5, knight f4. It's actually white who is fighting for something here, but maybe objectively black is fine. It's just a very complicated, sharp position. Okay, this is if black wants. I mean, all in all, knight g2 doesn't seem to be very prosperous, because it gives black a lot of different options. Yeah, let's say after knight f6, g3, if you want, d5 is probably objectively fine, but otherwise both g6 or e6 are also fine. So knight g2, I don't think it's so dangerous. Then what else? Bishop b5. This is a very tricky move. Actually, it can be a weapon. And I saw a few very strong players like Alexander Grishuk playing it in classical chess. Bishop b5, yeah, if your opponent doesn't know how to deal with it, yeah, you can really end up better actually with white here. So knight d4, I think it's almost, well, maybe almost only move to equalize in this position, because the difference is compared to e6 line or g6 line, yeah, that usually you have this position with a knight on f3 instead of knight on c3, and of course it's a big theory. But here white takes on c6 and plays f4, and this is very, very important, and then followed by knight f3. And this already gives white a considerable, I would say, plus. It's very, very strategically very dangerous position for black. Same goes after bishop b5, g6. Yeah, if you're trying to play in the same fashion as knight f3, knight c6, bishop b5, g6 line. Here again, bishop takes c6 is very unpleasant. So dc6, again f4 already, and then d3, knight f3, and white having a nice plus here. And the same goes after bc6. You already play d3, and very important, put the pawn on f4. And those positions are not that playable for black, but quite dangerous strategically, strangely enough, because if I remember, I won one game like this with white. I mean, let's say if black is playing in such a fashion, then white just starts his queen e1, queen h4, f5, bishop h6 attack. Sometimes here white can play b3 just to stop counterplay on the other side, b3, bishop d2, and it's very difficult for black to to do something with this pawn structure, yeah, because if you cannot really play d5 often because pawn on c5 is weak. Because if white would have pawn on f2 in such position, then of course black would have just played e5, yeah, and start to push pawns in the center. Here cannot do it, and this I would not recommend you to play like this with black. I think that after bishop b5 you really better play knight d4 here. But after knight d4 black is actually okay. Bishop c4 is usually played here. And now e6. g6 might be also okay, but here very important line is knight f3, bishop g7, and knight takes d4. C takes d4, queen f3, quite an important intermediate move, threatening mate. And the idea is that after knight h6, knight e2, there is quite some theory still in this position, but it's pretty dangerous. There were games of strong players. I remember Alexei Shirov played like this, and some other strong players with black. But yeah, there is a danger. I mean, at least if you play it, if you decide to play it with black, you really need to analyze it move per move very accurately, because strategically it can be, with a knight on h6, can be pretty bad. But hard to say if it equalizes or not, finally. But it's clear that from the white side, it's very possible to play like this. So after bishop c4, the best is, what I would recommend is to play e6. Knight f3 is logical already, knight f6. The idea is that after e5, actually e5, black has d5 move. And this is very good. I mean, black is probably already slightly better. Ef dc, so e5 is not an option. Then white usually castles, and now a6. This is also an important move, actually a6, and I think black is doing perfectly fine here. So the idea is that now in case of a4, black can already play d5 if he wants, yeah, with a good position. He can probably also simply play d6 and bishop e7, but d5 seems to be good. So then what white usually do, again, if e5, if white plays e5, still not good because of d5. Still black is doing more than fine. So white usually plays d3 in this position, and now b5, bishop b3, and it's playable still. I mean, this position is playable for white, so it can be a repertoire, part of your repertoire, because black is probably equalizing, but no more than that. I mean, white has a healthy position as well. So I don't know what is better here. I think both knight takes b3, but also knight takes f3 check, queen takes f3, bishop b7 also makes sense. And with a complicated position, quite double-edged, because from one point of view, white has a nice development advantage. From other point of view, there is always this c4 idea, cutting the bishop is on the air. So playable, but I would prefer, with black, I would prefer to take, I like two bishops. I would prefer to take the bishop on b3, a b3, bishop b7. And, well, black just, of course, if black manages to develop simply d6, bishop e7, he will be slightly better, simply having two bishops. So white should probably hurry up a bit, you know, not to get worse. So e5, and this position has to be analyzed, but general practice and modern engines shows that black is fine here after e5. Even knight g4, by the way, according to engines, is okay for black. But that's a bit strange to play like this. Yeah, a little bit ambitious, even though maybe fine. But knight d5, let's say if you just play a healthy chess, knight e4, for example, bishop e7, then you just want to castle, and check on d6 is not really given much, because you take on d6 and you castle. The bishop on b7 is very strong potentially on this diagonal, so black is perfectly okay here. And white can also try to organize some kind of attack with knight g5. Again, black has more than one option, but let's say taking on c3 and queen c7 looks very logical and solid. Rook e1, and one of the possible options is to play h6 now. queen h5, g6, queen h3, bishop g7, knight f3, and let's say a5, just trying to go a4 and to, yeah, at some point, okay, for now it's difficult to castle for black, but his king is pretty safe in the center, and one day black is going to castle, definitely. But for the moment, he's pushing his a pawn. I think black is definitely not worse in this position. I don't know if he's slightly better or it's equal, but in my opinion, no problem at all for black here. So that's what I would recommend you to play with black against bishop b5, because actually it might be the only way for black to equalize here, but I think it's pretty clear and straightforward way to have a good game with black, which is bishop b5, knight d4, bishop c4, e6. Another quite popular option for white, at least on the amateur and the semi-professional level, is f4 here in this position. But again, frankly, I don't think it's gives white anything special, because to start with, you can play e6, knight f3, d5, and if you remember, this position was perfectly fine for black. But usually black is just playing g6 here, knight f3, bishop g7, and of course white's play is logical and healthy, but it doesn't seem that he has anything really prosperous here. I mean, black with rather logical, simple moves managed to get a good position in this system. Bishop b5. Well, bishop c4 is possible, but that we will analyze via the knight c3, d6 move order later on, because black can just transpose with d6, but also makes sense actually to start with e6, maybe knight e7, trying even to win some half tempi. Yeah? But at minimum d6 is fine, and we will check it just very soon during this lesson. So quite often white is playing bishop b5, then trying to castle, and it's healthy, but if black is playing knight d4, again, you already know that here white wants to take on c6 very often, and then he will have a strategically nice position. But after knight d4, there is not much really white can do here, at least to gain an advantage. Of course, he can still equalize, but no more than that. For instance, castle, I guess it's logical to take on b5, takes, and now the most straightforward is d5 move. Actually, it's very direct move, even though a simply playing like this is also okay for black. a6, b5, let's say d3, d6, queen e1. Okay, that is a usual plan for white, as you already know in this position, trying to attack on with queen h4, f5. So only thing black has to know here that probably better not to hurry with a castle, yeah, just not to get under attack. So the best way for black is to play bishop b7, let's say a3, because if queen h4, then black can even play e6, already trying to change queens, which is of course very favorable for black having two bishops. So let's say a3, queen d7, and now, for instance, bishop d2. So white is waiting for black to castle and to start the attack, but here one of the possible and actually quite nice option is to play knight h6 and then followed by f5 at some point. I mean, white has a certain development advantage in this position, but black has two bishops and in general having a good position, I believe, here. But if you want some more straightforward equality, then probably d5 is just fine. Because if e takes d5, black can play a6, knight c3, knight f6, and then next take the pawn on d5 with a good position. Maybe white should rather play something like this, e5, d4, with a complicated game. Well, probably white has to try to play c3, because if black develops, he will have two bishops in a better position, and after c3, it's a complicated, pretty equal, unclear position. So this doesn't give much castles here. And in case of bishop c4, you can just play e6 followed by knight e7, and Again, black has a knight instead of c6. The knight is on d4, but maybe it's actually even better, yeah, for black to have knight on d4. So all in all, at least modern computers and modern practice shows that black is doing perfectly fine here. So this system is quite popular for white, but if black knows what he is doing, it's pretty harmless in my opinion. And then g3. Okay, this is a big theory, big system. Well, also after second d6, g3, it can transpose to the same positions. Well, of course, it's a game. It's a complicated playable positions, and white, you can definitely play it with white. And for example, Boris Spassky played a lot. He liked very much to play like this. And I remember Michael Adams liked to play like this for some time, somewhere in the 90s. But all in all, I tried to investigate it also to try to include it in my repertoire as white, but was not very happy with the type of positions which arise after g3. I believe that it's pretty easy to play with black, and objectively black doesn't experience any problem at all. So I think that g3 is playable, but no more than that. So again, as you already know, e6 is perfectly playable, knight f6, then if d3, d5, if knight e2. By the way, d5 here is also might also be okay, only different that now, of course, white can take on d5, play d4, and has a better version of those positions where, if you remember, he had to take with the queen on d4. But still, cd knight d4, bishop g4, actually, according to modern engines, black is okay here. Also, f3, for example, bishop d7, castles, and bishop e3, castles. And it, of course, white has certain potential because there is this weakness on d5, isolated pawn, but at least, modern engines just assess this position as completely equal. So it might also be fine, d5. But bishop e7 is another way of playing, castles, and now again d4. We already discussed this position, that it's okay, even though you need to study a bit the theory here, but nothing really to worry about. And just wanted to show you this typical position if white is playing d3 and then trying to push pawns on the king side. Then, for instance, rook b8. Actually, d5 is also probably okay. For example, like this, white is having a certain pressure on the center, but even after d4, well, it looks a little bit dangerous because of those knights and this d5 square, but in fact bishop f5, black is very solid, and again, according to the engines, it's just an equal position. So it's also possible to play like this, just to play d5. But I remember when I was a kid, I played the Sicilian, this kind of with e6, d6. At that time it was very popular due to Kasparov mainly. And I won quite a number of games just playing like this. Let's say rook b8, f4, d6. So I would let white push his pawns and start my counterplay on the other side of the board. And let's say h3, that's the most logical plan for white. Then, yeah, knight d7, because, of course, yeah, you remember that b5 is wrong because of e5. So knight d7, g4, and I would just remember push my pawns b5, knight g3, for instance, b4, knight e2, and now maybe not bad, by the way, move like h6, because it's not clear how white is going to attack really. Or even bishop h4 move, just stopping somehow white from advancing, and then I would remember push a5, bishop a6, c4. I think black is doing perfectly fine in this position. It is complicated, playable for white as well, I must admit, but yeah, not better for white, just unclear position. So if you like to play without g6, with e6, no problem, you can do it with black also. But usually black is playing g6. This is the usual way of playing this system. Bishop g2, bishop g7, d3, d6. So this is a very important position, kind of tabia, because you can also get it via second knight c3, d6, and now g3, and it gets to the same position. White has two different plans here. So one is to play f4, knight f3 castle. Well, to me looks most logical. But also another old plan, which more, I think, was liked by Spassky, is playing bishop e3, queen d2, and then knight e2, and then according to the situation. But I think in both cases, black doesn't have any problem. So let's say f4. Again, you can always, in this position, just put the knight on f6. And I believe already, if in this move order e6 instead of knight f6 is even simpler, but that is also fine. So let's say castle, castle, rook b8. You know this already. The idea, black is just pushing b5, g4, b4, knight e2, a5. And it's a complicated game, I would say. Let's say game can continue like this. Rook b1, just to be able to protect the pawn on b2. a4, bishop e3, I don't know, bishop b7, queen d2, and now black can play e6 or c4. Well, it is equal, I would say, very complicated position with lots of different options for both sides. But yeah, objectively, black have definitely equalized out of the opening. And yeah, if you're playing Sicilian, you are ready to play complicated, unclear positions, and that's what you get here. From other point of view, if white has a good experience and knows what he is doing in this type of positions, it's maybe, I guess there will be some people who would like it also with white. Not my cup of tea, frankly. I never liked so much those positions with white, but again, it's just a subjective feeling, taste, matter of taste. So, but f4 e6 is actually, I believe, even simpler already once f4 is played, and knight f3, knight e7, let's say castles, castles. And yeah, then here, for instance, well, again, white can try to push h3, g4. But yeah, in fact, the point is that after g4, there are not so many threats. Yeah, white sometimes can play f5 here under some circumstances, but pretty often it doesn't work. So, and black has very important idea of meeting this pawn storm with f5, playing f5 himself. So, just to give you an idea how the game can develop, queen d7. Just in case, let's say if bishop b7, who knows, maybe white can start some f5 ideas. Yeah, so queen d7 is a bit safer, keeping the bishop for the moment on this diagonal. Well, just let's assume white plays knight e2, for example, and then f5. Yeah, that is quite a typical idea that you know. Yeah, it's important to know this idea. Once you have e6, knight on e7, and in some positions, f5 is working perfectly fine, perfectly well. Let's say knight g3, bishop b7, c3, rook e8. And what can I say? Equal complicated position. Well, I don't see any problem, neither for black, neither for white. Just a game, just an equal complicated game. So usually white plays bishop e3 here, pretending that he wants to get d4 one day, even though it's not quite clear if he really wants, because, for instance, the main line here is knight d4, and it's a perfectly good move. But you can also play b6, because the point is that after d4, there is a very strong move d5. And actually, black is doing very well, because you cannot take dc5, you're losing a piece after d4. So actually, d4 doesn't really work immediately. That's why usually black just wants to develop in his normal fashion, bishop b7 and so on. So usually white is trying to play bishop f2. So the idea is that after d5, now you have e5. Yeah, I mean, that's the point, because if bishop is on e3, then after d5, black already wants to play d4, obviously. So it's a prophylactic move, bishop f2, but black can just go bishop b7. And in fact, becomes clear that d4 is not really a threat, yeah, because black has a very nice move e5 here, and after d5, knight d4, actually black is doing well, at least equal. Knight on d4 is quite strong, so b6 is completely playable, but the main line is knight d4. And now, okay, sometimes again, white is trying to play prophylactic move bishop f2, maybe with the idea to play knight takes d4, cd4, knight e2 at some point. But there is a plan of e5 was played in few games, and it's okay, very unclear position. But maybe even simpler is just to take on f3, queen f3, maybe bishop d7, followed by bishop c6, b5. Well, to me, normal equal position. So after knight d4, e5 is a possible try for white. And now the only thing you need to remember, actually, there is a very strong move, bishop d7. Not the only move. Definitely black is probably okay in other ways also, but bishop d7 is the best. So he just wants to get bishop on c6 at some point, and it works tactically well, because let's say after knight takes d4, cd4, bishop takes d4, suddenly after bishop c6, white cannot keep his extra pawn, because black wants just to take on g2 and play knight c6, and then he's taken by force back the pawn on e5 with a good position. Or let's say if knight e4, knight f5, everything works well tactically. Bishop f2, knight takes f3 check, queen takes f3, bishop c6, and again white, well, is definitely not better. Well, probably he still can equalize, but no more than that. So I thought after f4 again, if you are lazy and want to play the same setup against everything, and you really like the knight on f6, perfectly playable. Another, I would recommend e6, and I think it's just perfectly fine for black. So then we move to bishop e3 system. This I like even less, frankly. I'm sorry for people who really like this setup with white, that I am so depressing. But yeah, I really don't think it's so prosperous. Yeah, this so-called closed Sicilian with knight c3, g3. Because I think black's play is easy, and what I also don't like from the white side, that you know, black has many different options, setups, and basically all of them are okay. Yeah, but again, it doesn't mean that this system is not playable for white. It only means that it's not really to my taste. So bishop e3, now again, well, maybe the only system which now is already a bit less convincing is e6, because white has queen d2 and bishop h6 after knight e7. So that is actually the idea of bishop e3, is, yes, to stop this e6, knight e7. But maybe that's the only system set up for black which can, well, cause a bit of problems. Because everything else is fine, in my opinion. For instance, there is a setup just playing e5, simply e5, knight e7, very also classical, typical setup. Let's say if f4, knight e7, knight f3, knight d4, complicated position. And queen d2, knight e7, now bishop h6 already is not so dangerous. Pawn on e5 is much better than on e6. So usually black takes, plays knight d4. It's very dangerous to play long castle here, because it's easy to get mated quickly after b5, b4, so probably better to come back, queen d2, and let's say h5, h4 castles, knight e2, king g7. Well, black has no problem, completely fine for black, so e5 is a very decent choice. As usual, you can put your knight on f6 and, you know, just not even looking at what is white doing, what is his setup. You are doing the same thing against everything. So knight f6 is still fine. Usually white is trying to play h3 and queen d2, but again, rook b8, your plan is clear with black. You just push the pawn, and if f4, knight d7, you know this already, b5, b4 comes. In case of knight e2, for instance, b5, and the game can proceed in such way, for example, like this, and a5, you push pawns, yeah, castle, let's say knight d4, maybe just yeah, g4, a5, knight g3, a4. Sometimes in these positions b3 is already an idea, a3 also. I think black is doing well. So again, knight f6 is not the most popular, but I don't see any problem with it. Usually black likes to play rook b8 here. So he just waits a bit with a knight on g8 just to stop bishop h6 ideas. And anyway, he's first pushing his b pawn, and it's also a good move. Queen d2, b5. So now let's say knight e2. Okay, let's say if you play a3, now a5 of course is possible, but you can also play knight f6 again, because bishop h6, castle, well, you're not really going to get mated here, because long castle, white cannot really play long castle. He will, get b4 and mate, yeah, so he will have to play positionally like this, f4, and that's very typical. Once the bishops are exchanged, bishop h6, that black just goes e5 here and having a good position. Or let's say b5, knight e2, again, absolutely nothing wrong with knight f6, but knight d4 is what usually played. Castles and h5. It's by the way, very interesting way of playing. Already once white castles, you can start to, keeping king on the center for the moment, start to bother white on the king side, because the tactical justification is very typical, by the way, trick. If h3, black has bishop takes h3, yeah. Something you need to remember is, for this type of game, in this variation, it's very typical, yeah. So because bishop takes h3, knight f3 check, you are losing the queen, and in case of bishop takes d4, now you have cd4 and taking back the pawn, and b4, and black is better probably. So after h5, it's not easy to react on h5, because if you play h4, then you practically never can play f4 anymore, because black will get his knight on g4. So, for example, black can just continue playing like this, and including h5, h4 is in black's favor. Okay, if f4, then h4, and the threats on the h line one day might become very serious. So black wants, let's say, hg, hg, knight h6, knight g4, and who knows, white can even get mated. So knight d1 maybe is the best move, and then let's say you take on a2, h4, c3, b4, also knight f6 possible. I mean, actually, to my taste, it's simply slightly better for black, this position. It's very, very nice, very comfortable game, and some initiative. White has to be careful. Just to give you an example, f4, there was, I think, 1 or 2 games like this, hg, hg, knight h6, bishop f3, queen d7, trying to play queen h3, some mating ideas. I mean, one of many, many ways for black to be fine in this system. So, frankly, I would rather recommend you to play f4 than bishop e3, but still, both knight f6 and especially e6, I think black is doing fine. So this tabia is not very prosperous for white, in my opinion, and that's why it's practically not played anymore on the top level. Somehow white got disappointed with this setup, but again, on the lower levels, shorter time controls, of course it's playable. It's playable, and white is not worse, of course, objectively. But I was never afraid of the system. So well, as black, and was not really, as I mentioned already, was not a big fan of playing it with white. So knight c6 finally is well, perfectly okay also. Again, if you are playing the systems where your knight is on c6, I believe that, well, then you can easily play knight c6. If you don't put your knight on c6, you play a certain Sicilian like Nader for pause, and without the knight on c6, then you have to watch out for knight f3 and d4. So what usually happens actually is that knight c3 is played as an anti-Najdorf weapon. So most of the nowadays top players, they play quite often knight c3, so they have a certain idea against second d6. I will show you now what are the possible options. But against knight c6 or e6, against those two moves, white just wants to transpose to the main Sicilian, avoiding Najdorf. Yeah, so that is the concept why knight c3 is played on the top level nowadays. So now we assume that you are a Najdorf player, we assume you are Garry Kasparov, for example, and you're supposed to play d6 here, yeah, because you think that knight is the only possible Sicilian, yeah. So then knight c3 d6, and here white has a certain choice, also not very big one, but there is a choice of normally before f4 was supposed to be the main anti-knight, so to say, here, but now there is a d4 move which becomes popular and a very interesting attempt to fight for advantage in this system. So let us start with f4. Just to mention that g3, knight c6, bishop g2, g6 would transpose to what we have just checked, or knight g2 again. Yeah, you can check it via the second knight e2 in the lesson 1, knight f6, g3, and both g6 or e6. It's fine here, up to you. Depends on what system you like to play. So that we already know. f4, yeah, that was a very popular actually anti-knight in the 90s. Actually, many games with very top players try to play like this, but now with engines getting better and better, somehow white lost all the steam and optimism in these positions, and I really believe it's doesn't give anything to white. So knight c6 is normal way. Sometimes black tries to play g6, so the idea is to avoid let's say after knight f3, bishop g7, now d4 leads to a good dragon, bishop e3, knight f6, and f4 is played too early, so this is supposed to be good for black. This position, it's perfectly fine. So the idea of this move further is to avoid bishop b5 check system, because here it's pretty harmless, you can just play bishop d7, even though this bishop b5 is not too dangerous anyways, yeah. But and in case of bishop c4, probably then black already plays knight c6 and get into this theory which we are going to go through now. But maybe g6, white has the additional option of playing d4 if black tries this move further. And even though this position e5 now, this position knight c6, bishop b5, knight h5, according to engine, it's okay, it's very unclear, pretty equal, but at least it requires some additional analysis. So if you want to start with g6, but I don't see anything really dangerous in this knight c6 system. Knight f3, g6. And now, well, the idea is that bishop b5, I mean, that was the idea, to start with g6 to avoid the bishop b5 line, but frankly, I don't think it's dangerous at all. Bishop d7, let's say castle, bishop g7, d3, knight f6 now. Well, the main point is that compared to those positions when white was able to take on c6 and black had to take back with a pawn, if you remember, and those positions I explained that were quite dangerous for black. Here he cannot manage to do it because after bishop c6, black is taken back with a bishop already on c6, and that makes a big difference. And black actually wants to play knight d4 simply. So there were games I played myself with, I remember very well, with Sergei Rublevsky, a strong grandmaster in the junior championship of Soviet Union. I think 1989 I won playing queen e1. He played the correct move knight d4 at that time. It was not known, but he was already a good player. So he played knight d4, and this is the way to equalize for black. Takes on d7, knight d7. I played queen f2 and finally won the game, but the position is just equal here. So lots of exchanging. I don't see why black should be any worse. That's why white is trying to take on c6 here and then playing queen e1. So you already know this is a typical plan. And of course, if black on a certain level, it can be very dangerous, because what black is usually doing is he castles, and if black doesn't know well this position, then he would castle and maybe play e6 and f5, and white can have a very dangerous attack in these positions. Even though, by the way, here computer says that queen d7 is still okay. f5 looks dangerous, but after gf5, computer doesn't see any mate here and thinks it's a draw. But in any case, what I would advise you here with black is just not, as you already know, just don't hurry castling here. Playing like queen d7 first, or even b5 simply. Queen h4, a5. Because as long as you haven't castled, all these ideas of mate are not working, and then you first start to push pawns, play queen d7, and you'll manage to castle. And this two bishops, especially the white square bishop, which potentially can become very powerful piece, is securing black a good position here. So I think I would again even prefer to be black here. I remember, by the way, it was a good game. Tivyakov, something similar in one of the similar lines, or maybe exactly this line, Tivyakov-Kasparov in Vaikanze, and Kasparov won it very convincingly. So also, I think using the same method of not hurrying to castle. But yeah, in any case, I don't think it's dangerous really. Just that you should really play bishop d7, because in case of bishop g7, white would take on c6 and play, let's say, d3, and this already might be an issue for black. It can be not so simple, not so easy to equalize. So, and normally white is playing bishop c4, bishop g7, castle. e6, yeah, here I would definitely recommend to play e6. Knight f6 looks a bit dubious, even though nowadays I see some players, like, if I remember correctly, Wesley So, he was playing like this. It was supposed to be not good because of queen e1. Well, there is some idea of even playing like this, sacrificing a pawn, and actually looks quite dangerous, but according to engines, black is okay. For instance, after playing bishop e6, there is no mate. So white is playing queen e1, and okay, he wants to go f5, queen h4, bishop h6, and some strange move, bishop g4. According to, again, to modern engines, it's enough to equalize, but white has all those ideas with f5, e5 here. I don't see any necessity to play like this for black, even if it may be objectively given enough counterplay. Because e6, in my opinion, this is by far the main line, is perfectly fine. Okay, the latest development here is actually d4, the invention of Alexander Grishuk, but it's, to me, looks like more out of desperation than really an attempt to be better here, because there is, white can even play f5 just to sacrifice a pawn. It's a purely positional sacrifice. Knight e7, queen e1, h6, bishop d2, and white king h1 just slowly pretends that he has enough compensation for the pawn. The idea, if black castles too early, then sometimes he can get under very powerful attack with queen h4. But yeah, at least according to engines, black is slightly better here, and I frankly also don't believe it can be enough for white, you know, to claim any really chances to fight for advantage. Yeah? But that kind of play might be very tricky for up to a certain level, especially in blitz. You know, it can easily get mated. Your opponent, for instance, just as an example, I don't know, to play like this, your opponent plays g5, you take on g5, and you mate him very quickly. Something like that. But for classical time control and for well, a different level of play, that yeah, I doubt you will mate your opponent so easily in this position. So usually white is playing d3, knight g7, and queen e1 now. a3 is a bit too slow. Castle bishop a2, of course it's securing the position of the bishop, but black can do knight d4, for instance, is okay, but also simply rook b8, very typical plan, which you know already, starting to push pawns on the queen side and organizing his counterplay rather quickly. Yeah, so white normally goes queen e1, castles, And now, the thing is that black also wants to get d5, so white has to be careful about about his bishop, his white square bishop. So bishop b3 is supposed to be the main move. Of course, with the same idea as I've mentioned already, that in case of d5, white can always push e5 here. By the way, also f5 might be already interesting, some kind of attempt like this. For instance, queen h4, maybe there is some play here. So at least d5 is, it's not clear if it's so good after bishop b3. Yeah, the point is that if queen h4, then simply d5, bishop b3, knight d4. Black is quickly starting his play in the center and is at least equal in this position. Same goes after a3, d5, knight d4, and usually, white tries to take on d4 here, playing knight e2, and black takes on e4, for instance, and even maybe playing d3 in these positions. So very unclear, complicated, but whether d3, whether also I would say queen c7 looks logical, trying to attack the c pawn. Black is doing well here. Therefore, after bishop b3, I don't know about d5, but black can simply play e6. Actually, it's quite difficult to prove an attack for white. Yeah, it looks little bit dangerous, I would say. That's why in pre-computer era this line was quite popular, because black was getting scared of this attack and becoming a bit panicking a bit. But nowadays engines even just play like this: b5, simply ignoring, and after f5, for instance, gf, bishop h6. There is no mate whatsoever. f6, and white has certain play here. Okay, certain initiative, but black is pawn up and objectively probably having a better position. So this system, it's interesting, it's definitely playable. It's a serious anti-Najdorf system, but very dangerous for white. I mean, it's so easy to get worse here, because black will just push a6, b5, d5, c4. Your bishop, white square bishop, can be depending on the circumstances, it can be very powerful after f5 at some point if you manage it under good circumstances, and it can be taking part in the attack. It can also be totally out of play if black manages his plan. Yeah, so very double-edged system. Objectively, I'm sure black is fine here, but since a very strong players like Nigel Short, Michael Adams, Vishwanath Anand in the 90s, they all played this system. It probably means that it's pretty interesting. Yeah, it's not that bad. And just to mention the latest trend, which is here d4.